hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for this webinar. My name is Mark Lichten. I am a lawyer at the Cyber Justice Laboratory of the University of Montreal. This presentation today is part of our conference cycle on legal tech and reg tech industry. Through the presentations we've had and discussions we've had and that we are still having, including this one, we explored the real practical applications of technological tools in the legal domain. As you have probably noticed, AI is rather a trendy topic right now, but we wanted to go beyond the theoretical conversations about AI in the legal field. So we invited Noah Waisberg and Daniel Himmel from Cura Systems to look at how AI is actually put in practice for lawyers and the justice system. Cura System is an award-winning software solution that allows you to search and analyze contract and document text and uncover relevant information from contracts and all kinds of different documents. So without further ado, I will let Noah Waisberg, who is CEO and co-founder of Cura Systems and also co-author of AI for Lawyers, and Daniel Himmel, who is lead practice consultant at Cura Systems. I'll leave them the floor for their presentation.
Oui, allô, bonjour, merci, thanks for having me here. Je parle français, mais j'ai oublié la plupart de mon grammaire et aussi mon vocabulaire, donc pour ça, je vais faire cette présentation en anglais, mais désolé, je vais pratiquer mon français, mais je crois que maintenant, ce n'est pas le moment pour pratiquer. Mais bonjour. Hey, everybody, I'm Noah Waisberg. As Mark said, I am a co-founder and the CEO of Cura Systems. We are technology that helps lawyers at a majority of the world's largest law firms, as well as a whole bunch of accounting firms and corporates, pull data out of contracts faster and more accurately. Joined by my teammate, Daniel Himmel. Both Daniel and I are ex-practicing lawyers. I think our job still is a pretty legal job. But to the extent some of you are thinking about different legal careers and how AI impacts that, I think you can look at Daniel and I as examples of people who are in legal jobs that probably didn't exist a decade ago in the same degree. So without further ado, maybe I will tell you a little bit about my backstory. I'm going to go a little bit more into this because I think there may be some students on the line. And maybe it'll be an interesting story for you or not.
Yeah, no, if you may, I'm just going to stop you before you start. I'm sorry. Just to mention to the audience that if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, Q&R, depending on your version of Zoom you're using. And we will ask them after the presentation. I will monitor the discussion and be glad to ask them to Daniel and Noah. And also the information for the continuing education credits will be posted at the end in the chat section. So I'm sorry for this little interruption, and you can go with your presentation. Sorry.
No worries at all. So I did my j'ai fait mon bac McGill. Started a PhD program in political science at Brown after graduating. And realized partway through that, well, there were a lot of things that I really appreciated about academics, and being an academic, it wasn't the right career path for me. So I was very well qualified for law school. So I applied to a few and went to NYU's law school. On graduating from there, I became a corporate lawyer at Weil, Gotshal & Manges in New York. It's a very large, high-end US law firm, or international law firm, I guess. And I did mostly M&A and private equity and securities work there. Thought it was a good job in a lot of ways, but it wasn't what I felt like doing for the rest of my life. So every year I was like, I should go off and do something more exciting. And I still stayed in the job because it was pretty good. I liked the people that I worked with. I was generously paid, doing interesting work most of the time. But eventually I quit, and I sat and I thought. And I was thinking about two things. Number one, that I had a lot to learn, and that I could probably learn a lot about being in a business role if I just went to a company. But there weren't any roles that it sort of seemed right for me. Something like if what Daniel is doing now had existed, I might well have done that instead of starting the business, but it didn't exist. So then the other thing I kept coming back to was when I'd been a lawyer, it seemed like a lot of work that junior corporate lawyers, probably junior lawyers more broadly, but I was just thinking about junior corporate lawyers did, was super time consuming, really not that fun for the junior corporate lawyers. They weren't that good at it. Just sort of hated doing this work. And at the same time, it was highly repetitive and very expensive for clients. When I was a junior 15 years ago, it was 10 or 15 years ago, it was 300 or 350 US dollars an hour for me to do stuff. And now I think it's in the 500s for first years to do stuff at the firm that I was at. And it seemed very unsustainable that all this junior associate, like there's tons of junior associates, and it seemed very unsustainable that they would keep doing work that they shouldn't. And so I thought about, that was kind of unfun as a junior associate, not very enjoyable to do that work, but it also seemed like a real opportunity to help create greater efficiency and just make those junior associate or lawyer hours worth their high rate. And so I reflected for a while after I quit about what were opportunities and problems that could be solved. Like, where did people spend a lot of time? And I came up with a couple of different ideas. One while I was still at the firm, and then another afterwards. And both seemed okay. Like, one of them, some things are like it, are not like reasonably successful businesses that I think can be okay. But neither of them seemed great to me. And then I started thinking about contracts, and I realized that contracts fit the theory very well. That first of all, there was huge amounts of time spent reviewing contracts. It tends to be the main task of junior corporate lawyers. And corporate lawyers, like, you may not learn so much about what they do in law school, but most large law firms, like the largest group within a law firm, a large law firm tends to be its corporate group. And a lot of the time of the junior corporate lawyers, especially in mergers and acquisitions, is spent doing contract review. And I thought there was so first of all, tons of time spent. Secondly, people made mistakes at this work, even though they spent huge amounts of time at it. And the third thing was that they were often looking for the same things over and over again in contracts. So there are situations when you're looking at a contract and trying to think about, like, is this a good contract for me, Noah, to sign? Is it a good contract for our company to sign? Is it a good contract for our client to sign? But there's a whole lot of time when you just have contracts, like they exist. A company could have thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of contracts. Like the Université de Montréal probably has somewhere in the 50,000 contracts range, right? Like between like space contracts and contracts to get supplies delivered and contracts for services and contracts with employees, and union contracts and leases out and sort of marketing partnerships, like vast numbers of contracts that go into any enterprise, into like a hospital system, into the government of Quebec, but like also into businesses too, like Bombardier or something would have like in the 100,000 contracts range. And there are situations when they need to know things about those contracts, like what they say on certain specific issues. And the specific issues may differ from situation to situation. Like, for example, if you're trying to buy another company, you need to know about things like the change of control and assignment clauses that other company has. But if you were trying to, like if it was a year ago and you had a whole bunch of contracts and you were worried that your suppliers couldn't ship to you, you might be thinking about force majeure. Or maybe you needed to shed a whole lot of spend, and so you'd be thinking about termination for convenience or the consequences of terminating your contracts. Or maybe you would have a bunch of customers who you were worried about might be terminating their contracts. Like say you had a lot of travel industry companies, you might be thinking about what their contracts say about termination for convenience so that you could be prepared for the storm. Any of those situations, and so on and so on. And so there are lots of situations when people are looking through contracts for the same things over and over again. And our idea was that you might be able to build software to help people find that stuff and pull it out. So back in January 2011, I got together with my co-founder, Dr. Alexander Hudak. Alex has a PhD in computer science from the University of Waterloo. And based on talking with Alex and other guys with PhDs in comp sci from Waterloo, we thought that it might take us 4 months to harness the state of the art in machine learning in that time and apply it to our problem, and that our software should be pretty accurate after that. And so we decided not to raise money because we thought it would take us 6 months to raise money from everything I'd heard, plus 4 months to build the software. Or we could just spend 4 months, build the software, and then raise money later once we had something working. But the thing that really excited us was building the software, not raising money. And so we set to work. And 6 months later, we realized we had a very big problem, which was that it turned out that the software didn't really work well, that the state of the art hadn't got us to where we needed to get to. And our accuracy was not good enough. And so then we had there was no way that we could raise money because no VC is going to give you money to solve a problem like making lawyers more efficient that maybe you'll crack in 3 months or maybe you'll crack in 10 years. And so we just kept working away. And eventually after about by sort of 2013, so about 2.5 years, we got the software to work pretty well, to the extent that our users now tell us they review contracts in anywhere from 20 to 90% less time, and they do it with the same or greater accuracy. But in 2013, we had a second problem, which is that we've been running a business for 2.5 years and no one had ever paid us a cent. And that we did not think would make a very good VC pitch. So, so we kept working away at getting people to pay us. And in later 2013, people started to use us, then they started to pay us. And we were kind of staggering along as a company with 4 people with occasional revenue. And then in summer of 2014, everything kind of changed. And we started to really do well as a business. We finished 2014 with 8 people from 4 that summer. By 2016, we were up to about 30 people, and with large law firms and accounting firms and corporates coming on board. And by the time we raised our first outside capital, like first VC or anything like that, round in the summer of 2018, we were more than 100 people. We took in $50 million from US from Insight Ventures for sort of a minority round in the business that summer. And we've continued to grow. We're now about, with ups and downs, but we're now about 200 people. Most of the world's large law firms in the English-speaking world use us. So that means in the 2020 M&A league tables, 18 of the top 25 firms, I think, were our subscribers. Not that they use us on every single project, but there's some places that use us on nearly all of that. We also have a bunch of, as I mentioned, accounting firms, corporates who use the technology too. And we have a bunch of people who don't just use what Kira finds out of the box in English, but have taught it themselves. So Kira knows how to find about 1,300 concepts in contracts in English. We have taught it a few in Quebecois French as well, but we've had some issues with getting foreign language documents and not been able to train in foreign languages as well as possible. But some of our customers have trained Kira, and they've taught it to find more than, I think, 20,000 additional data points, some of them in production, some of them not. And that includes like firms in Germany, in Brazil, Norway, Austria, Denmark, India. It turns out Indian English or legal English is kind of different. And I think we've had customers train it in other situations as well. So lots of Kira usage in other languages, though we haven't been able to train it there as much. And that's the basic background on me. As Mark mentioned, I'm the author of actually 2 books. First of all, what we believe is the world's first children's book on machine learning, which is Robbie the Robot Learns to Read, which put out in 2015. And then most recently, this past February, we put out AI for Lawyers, which is now actually Wall Street Journal bestselling. Alas, so far only available in English, but maybe if it does really great, it'll get translated. Though if you can understand me well enough, I'm sure you can make it through the book. We tried to make it a really easy, fast, and pretty enjoyable read. I don't know if anybody has questions right now, but I know that I'll cover one that I often get asked, and then actually, perhaps it might be a good time right now to show you Kira, and then Daniel's going to do that. And then when I pop back on, one question I often get asked that I'd be very happy to talk to you about is if AI makes lawyers more efficient. So I was telling you 20 to 90% more or less time spent reviewing contracts. So an example of that is a sort of Chambers Band 1, like really leading law firm, ran a test, and they had 2 juniors reviewing the exact same pool of 50-ish contracts for assignment clauses. And the one who did it the standard way took 6 hours to do the work, and the one who used Kira took 2.5 hours to do the work, and it turned out he was more accurate. So if that's true, one of the things that some of you may be wondering about is, does that mean that we're going to need less lawyers in the future? So after you see a demo of Kira, I'd love to go into that and explore that question. Does that sound good, Mark and Daniel?
Absolutely, yeah. Sounds perfect.
Okay, so Daniel will give a little demo for about 20, 25 minutes, and then I'll pop back on and we can talk through that question and any other questions.
Great.
Excellent.
Daniel, please.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me. And Noah, thanks for that introduction. A little bit of background. So Mark had mentioned my title, which is a lead practice consultant in layman's terms. I'm a former lawyer, as Noah had mentioned. So I worked in Toronto. So I went to Western, practiced in Toronto at a large full service firm. And then I actually went in-house for 2 years working at a technology company. So I can see both sides of the legal practice. And then joined Kira about 2.5 years ago. So I actually worked on the product side of the business. So a lot of what I'm going to show you now in terms of Kira's out of the box capabilities. So its ability to find legal concepts in your contracts using artificial intelligence, that was trained by a team that I was part of. And then I shifted over to a customer facing team in the last year or so, where I can work with our customers on optimizing their use of Kira and their traditional practices. So as Noah mentioned, there's a lot of inertia when it comes to how firms kind of do their work and run their practices. So it's a lot of the burden falls on us to explain to them why a tool like Kira can again, optimize their work, reduce costs, increase profits and margins, and so on. So that's kind of where I fit in. So in terms of the tool, I'm actually going to share my screen. I'll walk you through a quick deck that I have, just to give you a bit of background on the technology behind the tool, because I think it's super important, especially given the topic today. So let me just share my screen quickly. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let me talk you through it really quickly, and then we'll jump into the tool, and then by the time Noah gets back, we'll open up for questions. So quick look at Kira. So Noah had mentioned the genesis of the product, how the pain point that he experienced firsthand was again, the genesis of this particular tool to help remedy those large-scale due diligence exercises that were heavily manual. So what Kira does, in essence, is use machine learning to identify and extract and analyze your contract. So again, replicating that manual process, but in a faster, more efficient, more accurate manner. But what are some of the key features of Kira? So Noah mentioned artificial intelligence, contract review software, but if we distill it down into specifically what Kira can do and what our customers are using it for, it's typically in these 3 buckets. So the first is the ability to find relevant text in your contracts. That's kind of its bread and butter, right? You want to find legal concepts, so you don't have to do it manually. The second is classifying your document. So it might seem fairly rudimentary, especially as a law student, but when I practiced, a huge piece of the review was just determining what contracts were what. So sifting through a whole box, either a physical or a digital box of documents to find what documents I actually need to review. So Kira can classify your documents without you having to open them at all. And then the final step, and you'll come to kind of know this step quite intimately when you practice, if you practice in corporate commercial work, is producing diligence reports, which is a report that you produce either for a senior lawyer at your firm or perhaps for the client, outlining all the risks that you found in the contracts. And Kira helps you do that as well. So just to give you a quick sneak peek of the tool, so this is the area where you would pick the concepts that you want Kira to pull. So we've got over 1,000 different provisions. Noah had mentioned it, ranging in a variety of different topics. So you've got your M&A due diligence, you've got banking, you've got real estate, and so on. Then Kira is going to extract those concepts from your document. So this is an example. Here's a contract. It's a commercial agreement in English language. And we've asked Kira to pull out some of the core concepts. So you're looking at the term of the contract, how long it goes for, termination for convenience, so whether a certain party can just terminate the contract if they want, effects of termination, what happens in the event that someone has terminated, and then the final one is force majeure. So in the case of a act of God, perhaps a pandemic, which is particularly relevant, what are the implications for both parties? So those are 4 concepts that are super relevant to document review, especially right now. And Kira is able to extract it automatically without you having to even look at the document. So a lot of steps after this in terms of getting into the final stage, because you do want to still do a manual review just to confirm. But Kira has jump-started your review to a degree that wouldn't be possible without it. And then the final thing I wanted to show you is this is that export that I'd spoken about. So you are going to want, and this doesn't look particularly pretty, but if any of you have practiced, and I know most of you are students, so probably not, but you'll know that this is actually the form that a lot of due diligence reports take. And it's really just a list of the core provisions that either the client or the senior attorney or lawyer on the deal want to review, because they are the key material business concepts that the firms want to review in order to determine the risks for both parties. How Kira learns. So this is, I think, particularly interesting, especially for a law school class or students or anyone in the academic realm, because this is going to dig into the underlying technology. So rather than the features of what Kira can do, it's a question of how Kira can do it. So the first thing to clarify is that Kira is an assisted review platform. So what does that mean? It means it's human plus machine rather than one or the other. So we hear quite often, and I think Noah alluded to this earlier, a concern that Kira will replace humans. We don't consider that to be true at all. In fact, we built our product envisioning that humans would play quite an integral role in the review process. It would be a human plus machine review process where the human would vet the machine's extractions and together would produce a high quality report. So that's our view. We've built the tool. The underlying tech is meant to be used in tandem with human review. So how does Kira learn? I think for me, this is one of the most interesting elements of the tool, because we're telling our customers that Kira can automatically pull complex concepts from your contracts without you having to even review it. So in order for you to trust Kira to reliably pull those concepts, you have to trust that it learns the concepts accurately. So you probably want to know, how can Kira do that? How does Kira, a machine, know what a change of control provision is, or find a concept like indemnification? we as lawyers can find it because we've studied it and practiced and been formally trained at law school to find it. So this is the number one question we get asked is how can you trust the system to find these concepts when they aren't actual lawyers who've been trained to find it? And so the way that Kira extracts the concepts is through a multi-step process. But the first step, and probably the most important step, is that we actually give the system real examples of those concepts. So much like you, for the law students on the call, when you go to practice, a senior lawyer is probably going to say to you, hopefully not on day one, but maybe a couple of months into the job, they're going to give you a contract. This is obviously in a kind of a corporate commercial practice. They're going to give you a corporate commercial contract and say to you, please review this and let me know if there are any concerning change of control provisions. So if this was me when I practiced, especially in the first few months, I would first say, what the heck is change of control? I'd Google it, and then I'd start reviewing the contract. And once you start reviewing it, you'll see a change of control provision and you'll start to get a sense of it, right? But after one document, that's not enough. You're going to need to review many of them. And then over the next 6 months to a year to 2 years, you're going to have seen probably 50, 100, 200, maybe 1,000 different versions of that concept. And at that point, you're going to feel comfortable that, you know what, in any case, or a majority of cases, if you're given a contract, you're going to be able to find that concept. Kira learns much the same way. We give it real world examples. So we have a team of lawyers at Kira who are actually showing the system what a change of control provision looks like, uploading a document to the system and saying, by simply highlighting it, this is a change of control. And we do that for all of our different concepts in the system. So Kira is actually learning much the way a human does, by seeing examples and looking at where it appears in the document and how it relates to other text. Once we've shown it enough examples, then that's when the quote unquote magic happens. So Kira, using the machine learning, will review all of those examples and produce a machine learning model as a result of it. So we'll look at 1,000 different factors between the different extractions or the different highlights. So when you show it a change of control provision, it looks at what words are included, where it is in the document, where it is relative to other words in the document. And then it produces that model that can, a kind of a predictive model that going forward can find that same language or similar language in future agreements. And the final thing I want to emphasize is, and I think it's important to clarify, it's not a keyword search. So traditionally, at least when I practice, I would use keyword searches all the time. And I like to believe that lawyers are doing these like super thorough reviews, and in many cases they are, but they're certainly aided by a Control F search. It's just the reality. If you're reviewing a 100-page document and you typically know that a change of control provision has the word change in it, you'll just look for the word change, take it to the right spot and review it. But that's flawed. You're going to come across instances where those words aren't present. So what Kira does is it finds the underlying concept regardless of what words are there. Obviously, if the words change of control are present, that helps. It's going to be an easy find, but there'll be instances where it's absent. I'll show you in a couple slides. A helpful way to think about the manner in which Kira learns, let me just see quickly, I think there's a question. Is Kira learning and using examples and plain language principles used more and more in consumer contracts? We can talk about that after. I'm not totally sure what plain language principles means, but let's open it up. You can even write in here just a quick elaboration on that, and then I'm happy to answer. Okay, so just to give you what I found to be a helpful illustration of how Kira learns, and this might be quite rudimentary for some of you, but I'm sure you're all familiar with when you go into Google and you want to put in your password to set up an account of some sort, it then asks you to identify a stop sign, for instance, or a bicycle or a train or a car. And what it's asking you to do essentially is to feed the system, so that in this case it's Google's AI, examples of what a stop sign looks like, so that in the future, Google's self-driving cars can identify a stop sign, because you are training it by showing it examples of what a stop sign is, so that in the future it will have seen enough examples to be able to identify a stop sign. Kira learns much the same way. We train it by showing it examples of concepts. So rather than tagging a picture of a stop sign to teach it a stop sign, we highlight the language that conveys change of control to teach the system to find change of control. So it's it's maybe an overly simplistic analogy, but to me, it illustrates kind of the foundations of how we train the system. We show it examples so that it can reliably find it going forward. And just again, to kind of double down on that point, here are 3 examples of this concept change of control that I've been referring to quite a bit. And as I mentioned before, that concept can be conveyed in a multitude of ways, some of which include the word change, some include the word control, others include neither. So if you're doing a keyword search, you're not going to find all of the examples, but Kira was able to find all 3 of these, despite the fact that at least in one of them, both the word change and control are absent. So that's kind of the advantage of a example-based system rather than a keyword search. And one other thing I wanted to touch on is the difference between machine learning and rules-based systems. So you might hear about other softwares that use rules-based systems to find key provisions in contracts. I think it's important to draw the distinction. Machine learning learns from examples. So I've said it a number of times already, highlighted by subject matter experts showing it real-world examples. It understands the concepts, the underlying concepts, and not just keywords. So that example I just gave you of change of control, it found an example that didn't have the word change or control because it was learning the underlying examples of that concept. And the last piece is it updates its understanding from previous learning. So it is a kind of an aggregated cumulative learning where as you give it more and more examples, it refines and refines and refines. And that's what we do. We work with multiple examples until we get it to the position where we're comfortable that it's going to extract the right concept. Conversely, a rules-based system, which has its benefits, it learns from kind of that if-then rules that are manually constructed. So someone has to map out the entire universe of possibilities. And then when you ask the system to go find it, it kind of does a quick scan of all of the rules and applies them. But if it's perhaps missing a particular rule, maybe there's a new iteration of a concept that's being conveyed in a document that the system hasn't seen, the rules won't cover that. There's a finite number of rules that you can have. And it needs to capture everything in order for it to kind of be that multifaceted system. So it has its value, but in many instances, it can kind of be tripped up when there are newer novel iterations of the concept. And the final piece is it doesn't learn from mistakes. It needs to be updated manually. So whereas Kira learns as it progresses, rules-based systems are static. So you have to continuously update it. So that's one of the key distinctions. The benefits. So Noah highlighted this. I'll walk through them really, really quickly. But the major benefit is obviously time efficiency. Lawyers spend a ton of time reviewing contracts. If you can use a system like Kira, it expedites that review, saves you a ton of time, improves accuracy and reduces risk. You can identify risk. So in that example I just gave you where Kira picked up an example of the concept that didn't have some keywords, if you were doing that review manually, I probably would have missed it when I was practicing. So imagine that was a really risky provision and I missed it. If Kira is kind of your second set of eyes, it's going to reduce the risk. Client expectations, that's one you'll concern yourself with when you practice, so I won't talk about it right now. Remaining competitive, same thing. Law firms need to remain competitive by keeping up to date with tech tools like this. Final one is quality of life. I think that'll be particularly relevant to students who go into practice. Reviews are unbelievably painful. So if you have a tool like this that can reduce the amount of time you have to spend on it, pull out the key provisions so you don't have to sift through contracts day in and day out. It increases the quality of life of associates, of actually any lawyer, and allows you to focus on higher leverage work. To give you some examples, so Noah had mentioned that kind of the studies that we had done, manual versus Kira-aided reviews. Here's a couple examples, some actual live examples from customers of ours. So the first one is a review of, there were 10 contracts, but they were substantial contracts. And the firm estimated based on kind of historical evidence that it would take them about 100 hours to review those contracts. So they were reviewing all 10 really lengthy, dense contracts with a lot of complex concepts. Using Kira, the final time spent was 52 hours. So they cut it almost in half. So that's 48% time savings. So that's not a rough estimate of ours. That's actually the time savings that was had by this particular firm. Another example, this is a large international firm. They had to review leases, 2,200 commercial leases. It's a lot of leases. And they also wanted to review 55 data points in those leases. So they wanted to look at things like where is the property located? Who is the landlord? How much rent is due? What's the term? Who can terminate? All your kind of basic data points for a lease. they estimated that it would take 3 years to review all those leases and all those data points. Using Kira, they spent 1 day on it. That's obviously very dramatic and not always the case, but it's just to illustrate the degree of time savings that might be afforded. Not particularly interesting for you, which firms are customers, but let me just go back to our use cases. So just to highlight, again, high level, the variety of use cases that we have customers using it for a whole host of different uses. So due diligence, lease abstraction, all things you'll come to learn when you practice. Let me just check. Oh, I did answer the question. Great. Okay, Kira demo. Let's jump into the product. 1 second. Let me stop sharing my screen. I'll open up for questions now, just while I'm getting my screen up. If anybody has any. Nope. Okay.
We actually have one, Daniel.
Oh, you do? Okay, great.
Still opening, yeah.
Yeah.
One from Monique Stam, since you already answered Paul's question on concepts. The question of Monique is, can rules be added? For example, if you had a previous system of metadata added to your contracts, could you add a rule to override or train Kira at the beginning?
No. So our system, and Noah might be able to speak to this better, just given his experience building the tool, but our system is exclusively machine learning. We don't add rules. That being said, we do have a variety of customers who use third parties to build rules on top of Kira's extractions, and it's quite common. And in many cases, they're actually kind of pseudo partners of ours. So we see in a variety of use cases where the customer needs a particular type of output, Kira will pull the provision, but they might want something more specific. So they might want to say, like, okay, in the event that the contract date is before this particular date, we want it to say it's expired or it's ongoing. And that's something Kira will pull out the provision that tells you what the term of the contract is, but it won't do that evaluation. So that's something where if you add rules on top to say, okay, is the date before or after this cutoff, you can kind of add that layer of logic and structured data as an output. So we do work with some companies to do that, but out of the box, our system does not do that. Great. Okay, let me share my screen. Here we go. Okay, I'm gonna try to fly through. Can you see my screen, Mark?
I do, yeah.
Kira? Okay, awesome. Okay, so this is Kira. Not super exciting on first glance. This is your home page. It just looks like your projects on the top and documents on the bottom. So just to give you a quick high level, projects on the top, it's everything that you're involved in. So if you're an associate at a firm, you're probably involved in a variety of different review projects. So that's where they'd sit. And at the bottom, those are documents that have been assigned to you. Let's create a project, really straightforward. So we'll call this demo, client number, matter number. You can add other users. Let me just add my colleague. This is, and now we, oh, sorry, I gotta put in some dummy. Okay, so this is, I've used this expression already, but where the magic happens, quote unquote. This is where you tell Kira what you want us to find. So we talked about it earlier. What are the key features of Kira? The number one feature is the ability to extract provisions from your contracts. Kira has over 1,000 provisions. I think it's close to 1,200 now. They're all grouped by use case here. So for those of you that are familiar, there's a variety of different kind of legal practice areas that we've got here. So you've got your bankruptcy and recession planning, excuse me. You've got your data protection, you've got M&A due diligence, you've got real estate and so on. And you click into any of them and you'll see a whole host of smart fields. That's what we call them. They're provision models that pull out these concepts. So if we're in real estate, for instance, you start scrolling down, you'll see a variety of legal concepts. So base rent, change of control, currency. You'll even see questions, and I'll talk about those in a second. Governing law, guarantor, and so on. Whichever concepts you want Kira to extract, all you need to do is just select them here and add them to your worksheet, and they appear right on your right. So everything that's on this right-hand side is what Kira is going to extract. So the way we often explain it is the left-hand side is your menu, and the right-hand side is what you're going to order. On this right-hand side, so we've got title, parties, dates, term of renewal, assignment, change control. So these are kind of your core concepts that you would extract from commercial agreements. Just want to highlight for you, given that it's a French-speaking audience, we have kind of an M&A folder for French provisions. So you can see quickly, we've got, I think, about 20 of them right here. So indemnity, change of control, confidentiality, and so on. I've added them to a different project, so I'll show you them shortly, but just for the sake of getting into it, I won't add them right now. Quick kind of a best practice, and this might be relevant for kind of understanding what it is that we train Kira to find. If you hover over this little eye right here, it tells you what the field is intended to find. So you can see right here, here's the description. It tells you what it should find. So I would imagine, and unfortunately, I don't speak French or read it, but I would imagine it's saying confidential obligations. And then it tells you the types of agreements that Kira was trained on. So that goes back to what I was talking about earlier, how Kira learns from real world examples. We actually show it examples in certain document types. So in this case, I can see it was trained on intellectual property agreements and distribution agreements. So those are the examples we gave the system to find confidentiality. So what you would typically do is find the concepts that you want. So here I can even search for some concepts. So let's say I wanted to pull out indemnity. Got my indemnification provision is right here, and add it to the worksheet. So you find your provisions, put them on your worksheet, and then you upload your documents for Kira to find. One quick thing I want to highlight before I move on is you will notice that there are fields, and let's do this quickly. There is a field right here called, does the tenant have the option to renew or extend the lease term? Looks a little bit different than the other fields. It comes in a question form. And that's because we've recently released a new version of a smart field. So traditionally it pulls out just the text. Now what it does is it answers questions. So in this case, it answers in a yes or a no. So we've got about 50 of these fields. I'll show you how they work, but it's kind of the next generation of our product where rather than just pulling the provision, it looks in the contract for evidence to support a certain answer. And then based on that evidence, it will select a specific answer and return that. Okay, so we've got our fields. Our next step is to add documents. It's very simple. We'll just do a quick drag and drop and just pull it in. I've got my demo set. And you'll notice Kira is now processing all of these documents. So if I click on this folder structure here, it keeps that folder structure. So all of my documents are in the same form as they were when I pulled them from my desktop. And now when I go into my material contracts, you'll notice that Kira's running these documents through a variety of different processes. And I think this is helpful to kind of focus on this stage, just to give you a sense of what's going on behind the scenes. So when you upload those documents, and you can upload them in a variety of different forms. So obviously a Word document, a PDF, Excel, even if you like saved a web browser screen and you uploaded it, Kira for the most part would read it. So it handles quite a bit of variety. But what it's doing right now is it's running it through OCR. So for those of you that aren't familiar, that's optical character recognition. So it's making the documents machine readable. So allowing the system to actually read the text. This is super relevant in the context of like legacy documents. And when you're working at a law firm and you're doing legacy review, sometimes these documents are from the 90s or early 2000s, and they're physical scans and they're not in digital form. So the ability to upload them and convert them into digital form is essential to doing the review. So that's what Kira is doing. It's converting them into that machine readable form, changing the orientation of the pages if needed, removing watermarks, and then it's reading the contracts. So it's actually taking that kind of built-in intelligence that we trained it with and reviewing the contracts to determine two things. First, what type of contract it is. So you can see right here, contract, distribution agreement, intellectual property agreement. So it's without even opening the document, it's telling you what type of doc it is. And then it's actually reviewing the contracts to find the language. So if we click in right here, you'll notice it's starting to extract the provisions. Let me just go over to our dashboard and just show you quickly how this is happening in real time. You'll notice these charts are populating in real time. So this is Kira actually, again, in real time, producing analytics about your contracts and telling you what is in them. So it's telling you the types of contracts, so distribution, intellectual property, financial statements, supply agreements, employment, and then it's going through the actual concepts and telling you how often these concepts appear in the documents. So if you're a lawyer doing a review of hundreds or thousands of documents, without even opening a single document, you can already tell what types of docs are in there, what types of concepts are present. And if you're doing that review, certain things are going to be red flags for you. So right away, you can say, okay, I've got a variety of employment agreements. I need to bring in an employment lawyer. Or I can see there's a bunch of force majeure provisions, and force majeure provisions often cover the implications of work stoppage due to a pandemic. So maybe I want to look at those right now. So this traditionally was done as a manual flip of the page. So I would literally take a stack of documents, put them on my desk, put one in front of me, flip through it, and move to the next. Now you're able to kind of filter and sort through those docs without opening a single document. Let me just move out quickly and go to a project I had set up. So here's a different project, and you can see I threw in some French language documents, so it's already identified that there are 25 documents in French, which helps you. And then you've got obviously your distribution of your concepts as well. If we want to go into specific documents and see the extractions, all we need to do is go into that document list and click into my documents. So let me go to my French docs. So here they are. You can see it's pulling out different provisions. So you've got your concepts on the right, and you've got the actual document on the left. So as I work through it, they'll start coming across the highlights. So this is how traditional lawyers will do their review. They'll work through the agreement and they'll see, okay, on the left-hand side, we've got my concept, it matches up with the right. So if I work my way through, it takes you to the right spot in the agreement. And then as an attorney, you can start reviewing it and see, okay, what are the implications of this? Can I assign this contract? What is the indemnification? What are the indemnification rights, limitation of liability, and so on? And this was all done and aided by the system. So you don't have to actually review this 49-page document yourself. You can just work through this right-hand pane, find the indemnification, click right to it, and do your review. There's also a bunch of workflow tools. It's not going to be super relevant to this audience, but as an associate, you can mark these documents reviewed. You can assign them to key individuals. There's a project management element to all of these reviews at law firms. So we've included a lot of features that kind of empower that process. So letting you track how things have been reviewed, making notes within the documents. You can see here, you can add a summary. So I can write a note saying, need additional eyes on this. So there's just a whole host of different things, but at its core, what Kira is helping you do is pull you to the right spot in the agreement in a fraction of the time. And that makes a massive, massive difference when it comes to these like large scale document reviews. So I'll mark this doc review and I'll move on. Let me just go back to my contracts, show you a couple additional features, and then what I'm going to do is show you the export. And then I know that we've only got a few more minutes, so I'll move on. We've got these additional views. So this is showing you what documents contain which concepts. So imagine you're doing a large scale review and you want to just simply know how many documents can I assign. You can see right here, this column, does this contract renew? Hover over it, no, yes, and it gives you evidence. So right away you can see, okay, we've got a variety of these contracts that are going to renew automatically. Maybe I want to look at them, see if that's in fact something I want to happen, and so on. So there's just an easy way, again, from this particular viewpoint, to click into a concept and see just the text that's relevant instead of having to go into the document itself. So a variety of different ways to attack the information or approach the information. And it just allows you to zero in on particular provisions that are relevant rather than having to review every single document, every single page to find the text that it is particularly germane. Okay, the final thing I'll show you is our extraction and export tool. So let me just quickly remove these searches. So let's say you wanted to do a final export. So you've done your review and you've realized, you know what, there's a particular concept. So if we go back to our dashboard, let's look at our fields. Something like, let's find assignment provision. So the assignment language is, it seems to be a little bit concerning. I want to produce a report that I can hand to another lawyer that has all of the language that I want, that is of concern. If I just click right here, I now get a filtered view of all of the documents that have that assignment language. And if I want to create an export, all I need to do is click right here, export, proceed to export. And now I can export it in Word or Excel, and I'm just going to do a Word column. And now it's being prepared. And it took a matter of seconds and it's ready. Let's open it up. and drag it over. And, and there we go. So this is just one example, and there's a variety of different ways to utilize this tool, and we see customers of ours use it to produce red flag reports at a point in time to just extract one provision or a couple provisions to share with a client. Or we see customers doing large scale exports where they have the entire universe of documents contained in this export. And it's just a different way to represent the data that you've used Kira to extract from your documents.
Thank you very much, Noah. Thank you very much, Daniel, for accepting our invitation, for your very interesting and great presentation. Lots of new stuff, lots of promising ideas. So yeah, for those of you who want to receive the continuing education credits, the link is posted in the chat already. And see you soon in our upcoming presentations. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks very much. If anybody feels like reading more, especially about some of the objections and ethics and all that stuff, AF for Lawyers just out. Again, only in English, but we tried to make it a pretty good and fun read as a book about AI for Lawyers goes. So feel free to check it out on Amazon or wherever you buy books. Merci, bonne journée.